Okay, amazing. And this should be
Oh, yes. I
the
forgot
last
that.
question we
The
have to get.
Nevada lawsuit. Yes.
Yeah.
So what happened is the state of Nevada, Governor Sisolak, our nitwit governor, passed a law, rushed it through the legislature, didn't have any meaningful hearings. And basically what happened was the interesting aspect is he did to made the whole election for November mail-in balloting, or made at least that the likely option. Then but he was over the top. He decided to create multiple voting locations in person if you wanted to go that route in Democratic areas, but provided very few in-person voting areas in Republican areas of the state. But he wasn't just satisfied with that. He decided that you no longer had to witness the ballot to be, you had to sign it, but no longer had to be witnessed. Multiple people could help you with your signature. Didn't even have to be a family member. They could help gather ballots. And the other factor, this is the big one, two big ones. It doesn't quite, you basically, you don't really have to postmark it, and they can receive it for days and days and days after the election. In other words, the way the postmarking is done, there's no way to check the postmark effectively. They've created a postmarking problem, so you can't tell when it was postmarked. So essentially, he's created a system where not only can the ballots arrive after Election Day, realistically, they can be mailed after Election Day. And so the federal lawsuit brought by the Trump campaign here in Nevada, their best claim, there's usually a lot of deference to states and how they structure elections, and that's mostly good.
So but there's deference to states in terms of how they structure federal elections?
Yeah. Because technically these aren't federal elections. That doesn't quite, that sounds counterintuitive, but what's happening is each state is voting for a person who will hold federal office, but technically they're representing the state in the federal office. So technically it's still a state election. So the same with electors. So last time this got meaningfully, of course, debated was Bush v. Gore in 2000. It was, what power does the state have to control how its electors are decided? And historically, that's very broad. But what Bush v. Gore established was you can't create standards. You can't change the standards overnight. That once in fact, for example, there's actually no right to vote for president. People think there is, but there's not. It's the state gives you that right. They say, well, we're going to pick our electors by giving you a right to vote for our electors. But what the Bush v. Gore said is that once you do establish the right to a vote, then you have to have procedural due process in how you make sure that vote is counted for. And so the basis of the suit is twofold. What's interesting is this may explain why Trump had that interesting tweet last week. I'm sure he was likely aware or made aware of the lawsuits they were going to be bringing on mail-in balloting. And what they may have told him, and what the main basis of this suit in Nevada is there's a federal statute that says the election can only occur on this day for these federal offices. So that's where you have federal law, because there'll be federal offices governing it, even though states otherwise have complete control over how that person gets elected to that office. To give an example, the state legislatures used to pick senators. Then the U.S. Constitution changed and required states to have direct election of U.S. senators. So there are constitutional restrictions, but in terms of the everyday procedural regulatory control, they give a lot of discretion to the state generally. But if it dilutes the vote, so there's a Carr case, Baker v. Carr, some other cases that say you couldn't dilute the vote. For example, in the South back in the old days, rural counties counted a lot more than urban counties. Each county had equal representation. Not one person, one vote. It was effectively one county, one vote. Personally, I think I'd like to go back to that, but that's another thing. But the U.S. Supreme Court said, no, that's a violation. It is one person, one vote, not one county, one vote. That's a dilution of the right to vote, which you had already extended to the voters. And so you had to enforce it constitutionally under equal protection and due process. So but the main basis of the suit is that the Nevada law violates the 1 day of election rule. That the election can only be held on this day, and given how loose the postmark standards are, and given allowing ballots to be returned after Election Day, they're saying really you're changing the election day. Now, given they filed that suit, that makes me wonder whether Trump deliberately put out that tweet of saying, "Hey, maybe we'll move Election Day," knowing the media and everybody would go crazy and say, "No, the law doesn't allow Election Day to be moved." which is exactly what his legal theory is. His legal theory is, no, you can't move the election day. And by allowing ballots to come in after election day, and particularly when there's no clear standard for how to interpret postmarks so that they could be postmarked after election day, means that you've effectively changed the election day in violation of federal law. That's half of their claim. I think they should win on that. But here's a big caveat. Almost every federal judge in Nevada received the approval of one man before they got on the bench. And that man, no matter whether it was a Republican appointee or Democratic appointee, it went through one guy for pretty much every federal judge that sits here in Nevada. And that man is Harry Reid. So for that reason, you never know what you're going to get in an election-related lawsuit that hurts the Democrats in Nevada. The other side is they're bringing the vote dilution claim because they're saying, look, they're allowing for certain kinds of ballot. They're basically saying they're diluting smaller town and rural ballots in favor of urban ballots by where they've located precincts and by how they've structured mail-in balloting, pointing out that Nevada, I think last time, ridiculous thousands and thousands of ballots went to the wrong location. I got multiple ballots at my address. Here in Las Vegas. So I have no doubt that will happen again. Years ago, they did a study of the voter registration rolls in Nevada, and they found the entire Dallas Cowboys team had been registered to vote here by somebody in Nevada. So, that's probably what happens is people get, money if they do massive registration campaigns, like $1 per voter or whatever. They'll do fake registrations. Happens all the time. Bugs Bunny was once found to have been registered to vote in Nevada. So Nevada has a bit of a Chicago type electoral history. So I think on the law, Trump's team should win. I don't know if Nevada courts will give it to him or the Ninth Circuit, but this is a Supreme Court kind of case. And what the Supreme Court may say is the problem with mail-in balloting is it has to have standards that make sure the election only happens on election day. And I think what it will do is it will require all ballots to be returned to the election office on election day, or the ballot cannot be counted. And that's the number one thing people are concerned about with ballots. Now, the second concern is ballot harvesting in general and signatures not being valid. They've maintained the signature requirement in Nevada. There is still a risk of ballot harvesting risk, but the big risk in Nevada is the timing of it. And I think they should ultimately win on that. And at least a risk with ballot harvesting and with voter fraud will be substantially reduced if the Trump campaign wins that lawsuit. Go ahead.
Procedural question. I mean, how do we make sure that this has a definitive resolution within the required delays? Because it's not by election day. This has to occur within months.
All this will be decided before election day. They'll have an expedited injunctive hearing. The district court will issue a decision before the end of August. Court of Appeals will issue a decision by early September. And the U.S. Supreme Court will have an opportunity to, in fact, my guess is
skip all that, go straight to Supreme Court.
Well, they can't really, but what they can do is they can force different courts to take action or appeal to the Supreme Court for the lack of action. So the ballots get printed in mid-September. There's some states that try to print them early. It's all a big scam to keep people off the ballot. But basically, there's a 45-day deadline to send ballots to armed service personnel overseas. So that's when they really time their ballot printing. So it mostly has to be done by mid-September. So all the courts will want to have a ruling in before they have to print the ballots. So that now in this particular context, they theoretically could issue a decision all the way up until close to election day, because this is just about how ballots get counted, not the printing of the ballot itself. But I would anticipate decisions by the end of September by the U.S. Supreme Court on this.
And it may be a stupid question. Is there no way to effectively say, we know this is going to get to the Supreme Court anyhow, skip the lower courts and Court of Appeal, and just these are the questions?
Theoretically, there's a certification mechanism, but they almost never use it.
Okay. And I'm going to get to two super chats because I noticed one put in two and I missed the first one. Sakaki Onse says, didn't the postmark issue get solved by GOP versus Wisconsin 2020? I remember a 5-4 decision. Sorry, I was told to read these slower.
That was a preview. The Wisconsin decision was a preview.
Hold on, I got to read it slower and fully for the podcast version of this. Didn't the postmark issue get solved by GOP versus Wisconsin 2020? I remember a 5-4 decision that all votes need to be posted, handed by end of day election day.
But it was the challenge there was a little bit different because you had it wasn't legislative change. You had sort of an attempt by the executive branch to change the way the rules worked. So the precise legal question wasn't before them, but I do believe it is a preview of what will happen in the Nevada case.
All right. And the second question of mine before we get to this next super chat, Trump put out two tweets. The one was opining on delaying the election day, which now your explanation could lead me to believe that was one of those gambit errors done on purpose, even if it meant losing face for whatever the reason for the day.
He didn't care about it. And he does it all the time. If he wants a certain topic to be discussed, like look at how often he'll bring up his competency test. He knows it gets a lot of viral conversation because people think they're taking pot shots at him. But in reality, what's being discussed is Joe Biden competent. That's the subtext of the conversation. So he knows, how do I get people to talk about what I want? I get them to find a way to make fun of me while talking about what I want, because it matters more, the topic of the conversation, than the personal pot shots they're taking at me. And I have no doubt that's exactly what he was doing with the election reference.
For a shout out to Shmoyoho, for anybody who doesn't know them, just did a pretty funny video where they did the man-woman plane. I forget what it was. Great song.
It's so viral. They actually did a random test with Charles Barkley, and he failed it. He could only remember 3 of the 5.
It's classic. All right, and now Corliss D says, isn't there a legal morass with governors and pharmacy boards ordering doctors not to treat patients with COVID by geez, I forgot the word, HCQ, killing patients or suing doctors for treating patients with life-saving drugs?
There's been suits filed in Nevada on that where they ultimately got resolution. Because in my view, it's a right of a doctor and a patient to choose medical care. How can we be in a situation where the government cannot interfere, including the most recent Supreme Court case, even in late-term abortions in many contexts, between a doctor and a patient about the taking of a life, whether you call it a human life or not, is up to legal and philosophical and medical debate. But I mean, definitely a very substantial medical decision. Yet somehow you can't decide whether to save your life with a drug. That doesn't make any sense to me at all. So if right to choice and right to privacy includes within it the right of the medical care of your choice, then these laws and these gubernatorial actions cannot be constitutional. Now, getting the courts to do something about it, again, it's the same problem. During a time of crisis, courts run for cover and hide behind the executive branch. They don't contest the executive branch.
Okay, and let's wind this up in a few minutes just so that everybody who wants to go to Matt Christensen can. Yeah. Nobody says John Podesta, skip that word, had a secret war games about mail-in voting, saying if Biden loses, the West Coast would leave. Thoughts?
Yeah, I get a lot of the nuts the left, where the left is going. They're talking about secession, actual secession. That's going nowhere. Now, I think there's large parts of America that really would not object to California seceding at the moment, but that's not happening. So all of that secession talk has always been gibberish, whether it's from the left or the right. I remember there was somebody who wanted to start the independent state country of Texas, return Texas to an independent republic. They even made a little movie about it. A buddy of mine was even in the movie. None of that's happening.
Okay. And the last question, which I think will be a good time to end, Trump put out a second tweet about, agreeing to mail-in voting in Florida. And a lot of the responses to that were apparently Florida's system for mail-in voting is unique or different than other states in that it's a little bit more secure. And by doing that, he highlighted the lack of security of mail-in voting in other states. I don't understand much about that. Is that an accurate assessment? And what makes Florida better for mail-in voting in terms of security?
So the for most of our history, we had no ballot at all. From the beginning of the American Republic up until the late 1800s, you just went in and said who you wanted to vote for, or you brought your ballot with you. Parties actually used to print ballots, and you would take that party ballot in, and you knew it by a signature or by a color or by an animal item or something like that. And then in the Australians invented the secret ballot idea. The U.S. initially took it up in the guise of, hey, we want to protect the ballot. We want to make sure that no one's being hoodwinked in what ballot they're being given. I think that was all a bunch of gibberish. They wanted state monopoly of the ballot because that would allow them to have more control over who could get access to the ballot. It was also a good way to discriminate against both minorities in the South and immigrants in the North, who often had lower levels of literacy. And so they solved that problem in the South by just getting rid of all poor people. Most poor people couldn't vote, white or black, in the South from about 1900 to 1950, really. They used a poll tax and everything else to do it. So we obtained a state monopoly of the ballot. We've used that. The governments have used that to keep people off the ballot. with every pretext possible. But along the way, we, of course, always designed a way by which people could mail in a ballot when they could not be physically present at the ballot box. So, for example, armed soldiers. Soldiers have been filling out ballots and sending it in from wherever they're located around the world since the early 1900s. Same with disabled people who can't get out, people in the hospital, things of that nature. It's become a more sophisticated system, and we mostly know it in the United States as absentee voting. The absentee being absent from the polling booth. The mail-in balloting is just an extension absentee balloting is mail-in balloting. Now, what's different is when people are upset about mail-in balloting, what they're referencing is the California system and other proposals that are being made. And those proposals that are being made is, I should say two things. There's one legitimate movement from absentee to mail-in balloting, like Colorado, like Oregon, like parts of California, like Florida in part, where they just moved. The absentee balloting used to be hard to get. It used to be you had to not only request it, you had to meet a certain standard. You had to prove that before you could get it. What they've done is they've made absentee balloting easier. That's the way I like to characterize it, to where almost anyone can fill out an absentee ballot. And what they call mail-in balloting in Colorado is often just anybody can get an absentee ballot. Now, what the mail-in balloting that's controversial is allowing ballots to be postmarked or having postmark standards where they could effectively be sent after Election Day, allowing ballot harvesting, so allowing other people to pick up the ballot other than the post office, so that that's a natural environment for people to just fill out ballots and bring them in. Not requiring signature validation or verification. So like in Florida, for example, you have to request the ballot. So that's a check because it makes sure that the only people who are getting a ballot is someone who requested it, who is on the voter registration file, whose signature matches that. So you're not just sending ballots out to everybody, where you end up every year, there are millions of people on the voter registration list that are in fact dead, that are in fact no longer living in that location, no longer qualified to vote for some other reason. And so the problem with mass mail-in balloting of the kind the Democrats are proposing is they're going to send ballots to everybody. In California, they actually tried to send it to all people, not even registered voters. So the first part of the fraud check process is being removed by a lot of these quote-unquote mail-in ballot schemes. The second process that they're often removing is who can collect it, letting it be collected by random people, not a family member, not a post office person. Third is allowing not having any voter validation mechanism, such as a signature verification, matching the signature on the ballot to the signature on the voter registration card. And fourth is, does it have to actually arrive there, and what are the postmark standards if it's a postmark basis rather than a arrival basis? And the problem is, the more you dilute those safeguards is what the Democrats are mostly proposing in most places. They're mostly recommending substantial dilution of all the safeguards that preclude mass voter fraud from occurring.
Yeah, it's amazing. And someone had mentioned in the comment that Florida, having gone through what they went through, have better systems in place to ensure that they can handle mail-in voting better than some other states, which are implementing it for the first time.
In New York City, they're disqualifying as many as 20 to 25% of all ballots. Because they're throwing them out. So whatever the ballot comes in, they're saying that ballot doesn't count. Completely disqualified.
Based on discretionary or based on...
Yeah, that's the other issue. Sometimes these standards are clear. Sometimes they're like Bush Gore all over again. Is this a Chad? Is this a dimpled Chad? That's part of the issue in the Nevada lawsuit. They're saying the standards are all not good.
This was the other reason why I knew 2 hours was our limit in any case.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's phenomenal. I mean, it's another amazing stream, Robert. I mean, it's just phenomenal, and we had a lot to cover given the week hiatus. But
we have a guinea pig.
Oh, we got a guinea pig. If anyone's...
There you go.
He was out for the whole time.
We adopted an elderly guinea pig, so
that's great.
Less light, yes.
He was out for the whole time, but I wanted to show you him, but
that's okay.
But then we had to put him back.
We'll show him later. But yeah, so we're very happy we adopted a guinea pig. Robert, okay, thank you very much. We'll let everyone go. Robert, stick around so we can say our proper goodbyes. Everyone, Thank you very much for tuning in. Thank you for the super chats. Thanks for the support, the comments, the interaction. My apologies for missing super chats. And we're going to do this again next week. I'm back in town, and I'm not going anywhere for a little while. So
why can you see me there but not here?
Wider screen on the ball.
Great.
All right, everybody tuning out, thank you very much. Have a good evening and have a good week. Okay, and I got